A Divine Comedy, Book 2, Purgatorio, by Dante Alighieri. Introduction to Purgatorio. In the second part of the Divine Comedy, Purgatorio, Dante's journey takes a turn towards hope and redemption. As he ascends the mountain of purgatory, he meets souls who are not damned but are undergoing a process of purification before they can enter heaven. This translation of Purgatorio focuses on maintaining the spiritual and emotional richness of the text, while ensuring that Dante's exploration of human frailty and divine mercy is presented in clear, straightforward language. Unlike translations that can be bogged down in poetic form or theological jargon, this version allows readers to connect with the deep spiritual meaning of Dante's encounters without losing themselves in archaic or convoluted language. The focus on clarity ensures that readers can fully appreciate Dante's meditations on sin, repentance, and the gradual journey towards salvation. As Purgatorio is a narrative of progress and hope, this translation makes it easier than ever to follow Dante's exploration of the soul's path to redemption, ensuring that both the emotional and philosophical aspects of his journey resonate with modern readers. Canto 1. To run a better course now over the waters, the little ship of my genius sets sail, after leaving such a dark sea behind. I will sing of the second realm, where the soul of man is purified and becomes worthy to ascend to heaven. Here let dead poetry rise again, O holy muses, for I am yours, and I call upon you to guide me on this higher path. Now I leave behind the infernal abyss and climb to the shore of Mount Purgatory, where the soul is cleansed of sin. The sky was full of stars, shining bright in the early dawn, and I felt the joy of being free from the shadows of hell. I turned to look back at the dark pit, but my guide Virgil said to me, "Do not look back, for we are now on the path to salvation, and the past is behind us." We continued along the shore, and I saw an old man standing before us. He was a humble figure, but his face shone with wisdom and light. I asked my guide, "Who is this man who stands before us in such a holy place?" And he replied, "This is Cato, the guardian of purgatory, who watches over this realm and ensures that no soul enters without being purified." Cato looked at us with kind eyes and said to my guide, "Who are you, and what brings you here to this holy shore?" My guide replied, "I am Virgil, and I come with this man who has been chosen to witness the journey of the soul. We seek passage through purgatory so he may learn the path to heaven." Cato looked at me and said, "If you wish to pass, you must first cleanse yourself of the stains of hell." He pointed to the shore where the dew of morning glistened on the grass. Wash your face in this pure water," he said, "and tie a reed around your waist, as a sign of humility." I did as he commanded and felt the cool water wash away the last traces of darkness from my soul. Virgil took a reed from the shore and wrapped it around my waist, and then we set off on the path that leads up the holy mountain. The sun rose higher in the sky, and I felt a new strength within me, ready to begin the journey of purification. Canto 2. The sun had risen to its height, and the sea before us shone bright and clear. We walked along the shore, when suddenly I saw something in the distance, a light moving swiftly across the water, like a star descending from the sky. I watched in awe as the light drew near, and soon I could make out the shape of a boat gliding over the waters. In the boat stood an angel, and with a single motion of his wings, he moved the boat with divine speed towards the shore where we stood. As the boat came closer, I saw that it was filled with souls, singing together in a chorus of joy. "In exitu Israel de Egypto," they sang. Out of Egypt Israel came. These were the souls who had been saved, and now they were making their way to the shores of purgatory to be cleansed before entering heaven. The angel guided the boat to the shore, and the souls stepped out, still singing their hymn of praise. They looked around, confused and uncertain, for this was the beginning of their journey towards salvation. One of the souls recognized me and came forward, his face filled with joy and wonder. It was Casella, my fellow and my fellow poet and friend, whom I had loved in life. We embraced, and I asked him, "Casella, how have you come here?" And he replied, "I have been waiting a long time to make this journey, but now, by the grace of God, I have been brought here to begin my purification." I said to him, "Would you sing for us as you did in life, when your voice brought comfort to my soul?" And Casella smiled, then began to sing, a sweet and gentle song, filling the air with music. We stood in silence, listening to the beauty of his voice, and for a moment all our worries and fears melted away. But then Cato appeared and rebuked us, saying, "What is this? Why do you linger here? This is not the time for rest, but for action. You must continue on your journey." At his words, the souls scattered, hurrying towards the mountain, eager to begin their ascent. Virgil and I followed, making our way towards the path that would lead up the holy mountain of Purgatory. Canto 3. As we climbed the mountain's path, I turned back and looked down, but the sight of the sea was blocked by the steepness of the hill. I felt a pang of doubt and fear, and I turned to my guide and said, "Master, if you are not alive, how can you move through this realm? And why do I feel so full of fear when I see nothing behind me?" Virgil looked at me with gentle eyes and said, "Do not let your doubt take hold. We are in God's hands, and His will guides us through this journey. You must trust in the path ahead and not look back in fear." Reassured by his words, I continued climbing, though the path was steep and the way was difficult. As we ascended, we came upon a group of souls, moving slowly in the same direction, but they seemed to float, casting no shadow on the ground. I looked at Virgil, and he said, "These souls have not yet fully realized their condition. They are those who delayed their repentance until the last moments of life." The souls turned to us, and one of them stepped forward, saying, "Who are you? Who walks among us with a body that casts a shadow on the ground?" I replied, "I am alive, and I have been granted this journey through the realms of the afterlife." The soul, astonished, said, "Then tell us how it is that you have come to this place, and what lies ahead of us." Before I could answer, Virgil stepped forward and spoke, "Do not be troubled, for this journey has been ordained by heaven. But now I must ask you, who are you, and what brought you here to Purgatory?" The soul who had spoken bowed his head and said, "I am Manfred, the grandson of Empress Constance. In life I sinned greatly, but at the moment of death I turned to God and sought His mercy. Though I died excommunicated, God's infinite love reached out to me, and I was saved from eternal damnation. But because of my sins, I must spend many years here in Purgatory before I can ascend to heaven." I looked at Manfred in wonder, for his story filled me with hope. He continued, "Tell my daughter Constance, if you return to the world, that I have been saved by God's grace. Though I suffer here, I know that one day I will be free." With those words, Manfred and the other souls began their slow ascent, leaving us behind. Virgil and I continued on our way, climbing ever higher up the mountain of Purgatory, with renewed strength and faith. Canto 4. When the soul is caught by one great joy, it often does not notice another pain. This is how I felt as I climbed the mountain, my thoughts so focused on Manfred's words that I did not feel the strain of the ascent. Suddenly my guide stopped and said, "Look around, for we have come to a place where you must pay attention." I looked up and saw that we had reached a ledge that circled the mountain, with a narrow path that wound along its edge. We stepped carefully onto the ledge, following the path that curved along the steep face of the mountain. As we walked, I noticed that the sun was shining from the left side of the sky, casting shadows in the opposite direction of what I was used to. I turned to my guide in confusion and asked, "Master, how is it that the sun shines from this side when it should be on the other?" He smiled and said, "You forget, my son, that we are no longer in the northern hemisphere. Here the sun rises from the south, and everything appears different from what you have known." Reassured, I continued walking, but the path grew steeper and I felt the weight of the climb. We came to a place where the path was so narrow that we had to press ourselves against the rock face to avoid falling. At last we reached a resting place, and my guide said, "Let us rest here for a moment and catch our breath." As we rested, I looked out over the mountain and saw the vast expanse of the sea below, shimmering in the light of the sun. I marveled at the beauty of the view and felt a deep sense of peace and awe Then, as we prepared to continue, a voice called out to us from nearby. I turned and saw a group of souls sitting on the ledge, their faces filled with weariness. One of them said to us, "Tell us, if you know, how far must we climb before we reach the next level of purgatory?" Virgil answered, "We are strangers here, but we have been told that the path ahead leads to the place where the soul is purified by love." The souls sighed, and one of them said, "We have been here for many years, and we cannot move forward until the prayers of those on earth intercede on our behalf." I felt pity for these souls and asked, "Who are you, and what was your sin?" One of the souls replied, "I am Belacqua, and in life I was slow to repent, delaying my conversion until the very end. Now I must wait here, and in this place of idleness, until I am ready to move forward." I smiled at him with compassion, and he smiled sadly, saying, "Do not weep for me, for I know that one day I will be freed from this place." With that, we left the souls behind and continued our climb, determined to reach the next level of the holy mountain. Canto 5. As we continued along the steep path, we moved more quickly, but my guide urged me to hasten, and I followed closely behind him. But as we walked, a group of souls came into view, running towards us with great speed as if they were racing to reach their goal. I was startled by their sudden appearance and turned to my guide, saying, "Who are these souls moving so swiftly along the path?" He replied, "These are the souls who died by violence, but who repented at the moment of death. Now they race forward in their eagerness to be purified and reach heaven." One of the souls stopped before us and stepped forward, saying, "If you know the way, tell us how to ascend more quickly, for we are filled with longing to reach the summit." Virgil answered, "Do not be impatient, for the path to heaven requires patience and the purifying work of love." Hearing this, the souls sighed, and one of them said to me, "Since you are still alive, I beg you, if you return to the world, remember us in your prayers, for the prayers of the living can help shorten our time here." I asked, "Who are you, and how did you come to this place?" The soul replied, "I was once one Conte de Montefeltro, and I died in battle. Though I lived a life of sin, at the moment of my death I called upon the name of Mary, and was saved from damnation. The devil came to claim my soul, but the angels took me instead, for I had repented in my final breath. Now I am here in purgatory, seeking to be purified before I can ascend to heaven." I felt great compassion for Buonconte, and promised to remember him in my prayers. As we spoke, another soul approached, saying, "I too beg for your prayers. I am Lapia, and I was murdered by my husband. Though my life was cut short, I turned to God in my last moments, and now I seek his mercy." I looked at her with pity, and assured her that I would keep her in my thoughts. The souls thanked me, then continued with their swift ascent, racing forward with new hope and energy. Virgin and I resumed our climb, though the path grew steeper and more difficult with every step. Canto 6. When a game of dice is over, the loser stays behind in sorrow, while the winner moves on in joy, but both are surrounded by onlookers, begging for their favor. So I found myself surrounded by a crowd of souls, all eager for my prayers, for they knew that I could help shorten their time in purgatory. They pressed around me, stretching out their hands, crying, "Remember us, pray for us when you return to the world." But Virgil gently urged me forward, saying, "Do not delay, for we must continue on our way." Reluctantly, I left the souls behind, though their pleas echoed in my heart. As we climbed further, I turned to Virgil and asked, "Master, why do the prayers of the living help those souls in purgatory? Do they not depend only on their own repentance and suffering?" And he replied, "The love of God is infinite, and it extends beyond the grave. The prayers of the living can reach the souls in purgatory and help them move more quickly towards their purification. This is the mystery of divine mercy, and it is beyond our full understanding." We continued climbing, but I could not stop thinking of the souls we had passed, each one longing for release from the suffering of purgatory. As we walked, a man came towards us, walking with a dignified and measured pace. I recognized him at once, for it was Sordello, the great poet of Mantua. When he saw us, he approached Virgil with a look of reverence and awe, saying, "Are you not Virgil, the glory of Mantua, whose words have brought light to so many souls?" Virgil smiled and replied, "Yes, I am Virgil, and this man here is on a journey through purgatory to learn the path of salvation." At this, Sordello embraced Virgil, overcome with joy at meeting his fellow Mantuan in this holy place. They spoke together for a while, sharing stories of their homeland, and I stood by, grateful to witness such a meeting. Then Sordello said to Virgil, "Let me guide you further along the path of purgatory. I will show you the way to the place where souls prepare for their purification." We gladly accepted his offer, and together we set off on the path, climbing higher toward the summit of the mountain. Canto 7. After the greeting between the poets, Sordello stepped forward as our guide, leading us along the path that wound around the mountain. As we walked, he said to us, "This mountain of purgatory is divided into different levels, and each soul must ascend according to the weight of their sins. But now let us take a rest, for the sun is setting, and it is not possible to continue the climb at night." We sat down on the slope of the mountain, and I turned to Sordello, eager to learn more about the souls who dwelt here. I asked him, "Who are the souls that we will meet as we ascend this holy mountain?" And Sordello replied, "Many noble souls dwell here, and each one waits to be purified before they can enter heaven. But among them are rulers and kings who once held power over nations." As he spoke, he pointed to a group of souls seated nearby, their faces turned towards the setting sun. "Look there," he said, "for those are the souls of kings and princes who once ruled with power and might, but who now wait humbly for their purification." I looked and saw them clearly. The soul of Emperor Rudolph, who had neglected his duties and now sought redemption in this place. Beside him sat King Ottokar of Bohemia, King Philip the Bold of France, and others who had once wielded great power. Each one of them sat in silence, contemplating their past lives and the errors they had made. I felt a sense of awe and humility. These were men who had once ruled the world, and now they were waiting, just like all the other souls, at their chance at redemption. Sordello turned to us and said, "Do you see how even the greatest kings must bow before the justice of God? In this place there is no distinction between the high and the low, for all must be purified before they can enter heaven." As the sun sank lower, casting a golden glow over the mountain, we sat in silence, waiting for the night to pass and the new day to begin. Canto 8. The hour was near when the setting sun could no longer warm the sky, and the stars began to appear, shining softly in the twilight. As we sat in silence, a soul came towards us, singing, and his voice was like a gentle breeze, carrying peace and comfort to our hearts. He sang the hymn of the evening, Te Lucius ante terminum, a prayer for protection through the night. I looked towards the singer and saw that it was a soul filled with light and serenity. When he finished his song, he approached us and said, "Blessed are those who travel this path, for they are walking toward the light of God." I recognized the soul as Nino Visconti, a judge from Pisa who had ruled with fairness and justice in life. I greeted him with joy, for I had known him in the world above, and he spoke to me with warmth, saying, "Dante, my friend, I am glad to see you here, and I pray that your journey will lead you to the glory of heaven." I asked him about his time in purgatory, and he told me of his repentance and hope. But then he sighed and said, "My widow has forgotten me, and no longer prays for my soul. She has taken another husband, and my memory fades in her heart." I felt great sorrow for him and promised that I would remember him in my prayers when I returned to the world. As we spoke, two angels descended from the sky, clothed in green robes with wings of shimmering gold. They came to guard this place, for the night was falling, and the angels were sent to protect the souls from the temptations of the night. With their shining swords drawn, they took their positions on either side of the path, watching over the souls as they rested through the darkness. Then, from the distance, a dark figure appeared, moving stealthily along the path. It was a serpent, the symbol of temptation and evil. But as it slithered closer, the angels raised their swords, and the serpent fled in terror, vanishing into the shadows. The souls of purgatory were safe, protected by the light of the angels, and we all settled down for the night. awaiting the dawn of a new day. Canto 9. The dawn was breaking and the stars began to fade as the sky turned pale with the first light of day. I'd been in a deep sleep, but now I woke to find myself rested and ready to continue the climb. Virgil stood beside me, watching the horizon, and he said, "It is time to rise, for the morning has come, and we must continue our journey." We set off again, climbing higher up the mountain, following the path that wound through the rocks and ledges. As we ascended, I saw a radiant figure standing before us, dressed in white robes and holding a set of golden keys. This was the angel who guarded the entrance to Purgatory, and he spoke to us with authority, saying, "Who are you who seeks to enter this holy place?" Virgil replied, "We came by divine will, and this man has been chosen to witness the journey of the soul." The angel looked at me with kind eyes and turned the gate behind him. He used the golden key to unlock the door and the silver key to open it wide. As the door swung open, the angel said, "Enter this gate with humility, and remember that the path to heaven is one of repentance and love." We passed through the gate, and I heard it close behind us with a loud, reverberating sound. The angel called out after us, "Do not look back. Keep your eyes on the path ahead and climb with faith and courage." We walked forward, and the air seemed fresher and purer, as if the weight of sin had been lifted from my soul. The light of the sun grew brighter, and I felt a new sense of peace and hope as we ascended further up the mountain. I asked Virgil, "What lies ahead of us now, and what trials must we face?" He replied, "Now we have entered the true realm of purgatory, where the soul is purified through the work of repentance. You will see how each soul must bear the weight of their sins, and how they are cleansed through love." We continued climbing, and as we walked, I could hear the voices of the souls singing hymns of praise and prayer, lifting their hearts to God in hope of redemption. Canto 10. Now we climbed the steep slope and reached the first terrace of the mountain. Here the rock was smooth and polished, as if it had been shaped by a master's hand. Along the cliff walls, I saw carvings of incredible beauty, scenes so vivid and lifelike that they seemed to move before my eyes. I marveled at the artistry, for these were not ordinary carvings. They were the works of divine power, meant to teach the souls here the lessons of humility. The first scene I saw was the Annunciation, where the angel Gabriel appeared to Mary, bringing her the message of God's grace. The humble virgin accepted her role, bowing before the will of heaven. The next scene depicted King David, dancing before the Ark of the Covenant, celebrating the glory of God with joyful humility. Though he was a king, he did not hesitate to humble himself before his Creator. Finally, I saw the Emperor Trajan, stopping his army to grant justice to a poor widow who had asked for his help. Though he held the power of Rome, Trajan bent low to listen to the woman's plea and acted with mercy and humility. I stood in awe before these images, for they showed the virtue of humility, which the souls here must learn before they can ascend to heaven. As I looked upon the carvings, Virgil turned to me and said, "These images are placed here to remind the souls of the virtue they must embrace. Each scene shows an example of humility, for only through humility can the soul be purified and made worthy of God's love." As we continued walking along the terrace, I saw a group of souls carrying heavy stones on their back. They moved slowly and painfully, bent low under the weight of their burdens. I asked Virgil, "Who are these souls, and why do they suffer so greatly?" He replied, "These are the souls of the proud, who in life held themselves above others. Now they must carry the weight of their pride and be humbled before they can ascend." One of the souls lifted his eyes to me and asked, "Who are you who walks with your head held high while we are bent under our burdens?" I replied, "I am still alive, and I have been granted this journey through purgatory to learn the ways of the soul." The soul looked at me with wonder and said, "Then remember us in your prayers, for we long to be freed from this burden and to continue our ascent to heaven." I promised to remember them and continued walking, moved by the sight of their suffering and the weight of their pride. Canto 11. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. So began the soul's prayer, rising from their lips in humble voice. They prayed for their release from their burdens that held them to the ground, and for the mercy of God to lift their spirits so they can ascend to heaven. As I walked among them, I listened to their prayer, and felt moved by the sincerity of their words. These were the souls of the proud, who in life had exalted themselves, but now sought redemption through humility and prayer. When their prayer was done, one of the souls looked up to me and asked, "Who are you that walks among us without burden?" I answered, "I am alive, and I walk this path by God's will, to learn the way of salvation." The soul, amazed at my answer, said, "If you are truly alive, then I beg you, remember me when you return to the world, and tell my daughter to pray to me." I asked, "Who are you, and what was your life like?" The soul replied, "I am Umberto Aldobrandeschi, a nobleman from Tuscany. In life I was proud of my name and rank, and I looked down on others, but now I carry the weight of my pride and seek redemption through humility." I promised to remember him and moved on, for the sight of their suffering filled me with both sorrow and awe. As I walked further, another soul lifted his face toward me. His expression was one of deep humility, and he spoke softly, saying, "I am Odarsi of Gubbio, a master of illuminated manuscripts, but in life I was consumed by envy. I thought myself greater than others, and now I see the folly of my pride." He paused, then added, "Though I once gloried in my art, I now know that fame is fleeting. There is always someone greater who will come after us, and our pride and achievements mean little in the grand scheme of things." I listened to his words and felt the truth in his humility. He had learnt the lesson of purgatory, that all human pride must be laid aside before the soul can rise to heaven. As we continued walking, Virgil turned to me and said, "Do you see how the proud are humbled? Their burden is heavy, but through it they could learn the virtue of humility. Only by shedding their pride can they be made worthy of God's love." I nodded, for the lesson was clear. Pride must be cast aside and humility embraced, before the soul can ascend to the light of heaven. Canto 12. We continued walking along the terrace, and as we moved forward, I saw more carvings on the ground, depictions of those who had fallen because of their pride. The first image I saw was of Lucifer, the angel who had rebelled against God and was cast down from heaven because of his pride. He lay on the ground, crushed beneath the weight of his own ambition. Next I saw the story of Briareus, the giant who defied the gods and was struck down by Jupiter's thunderbolt, his great strength reduced to nothing. I also saw the story of Nimrod, who built the Tower of Babel, only to have it destroyed by God and his language confused. There were more images, each one a reminder of the dangers of pride. Arachne, who dared to challenge Minerva and was transformed into a spider, King Saul, who fell on his sword after losing the favor of God, and many others, all brought low by their arrogance. As I looked at these carvings, I felt the weight of their lessons, for they showed how pride can lead to ruin and downfall. We continued walking, and soon we reached the edge of the terrace. There we saw an angel standing before us, dressed in robes bright as the dawn. The angel greeted us with a gentle voice, saying, "Come, for the way is open, and the burden of pride has been lifted." With a single touch, the angel removed the letter P that had been carved on my forehead, one of the marks of sin that I had carried since entering purgatory. I felt a great sense of relief, as if a weight had been lifted from my soul. The angel then pointed to a narrow path that led upward to the next terrace, and said, "Go forth with humility, for the way ahead is clear." We began our ascent, climbing the steep path with renewed strength. The burden of pride had been left behind. As we climbed, Virgil said to me, "Do you see how pride is punished, and how humility is rewarded? The souls on this terrace learn the virtue of humility through their suffering, and now you, too, have taken your first step toward the light of heaven." I nodded, grateful for the lessons I had learned, and determined to continue my journey with a humble heart. Canto 13. We climbed up to the second terrace, where the sin of envy is purged, and the air felt lighter, though the path was still steep. As we entered this level of the mountain, I saw no carvings or sculptures, but instead I heard voices chanting softly in the air. They sang, "Blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy," and their voices carried a sense of peace, as if they were praying for the souls who struggled to overcome envy. As we continued walking, I soon saw the souls of the envious. They were seated along the edge of the terrace, clothed in simple robes. Each one had their eyes sewn shut with wire, so they could not see the world around them. Their hands moved gently before them as if they were feeling their way through the darkness. I felt a deep sense of pity for them. Their punishment was harsh. They had been blinded to the good of others in life, and now they were physically blind, forced to rely on the mercy of others to guide them. I asked Virgil, "Master, who are these souls, and why are they punished in this way?" He replied, "These are the souls of the envious, who in life looked with jealousy at the good fortune of others. Now they must walk in darkness, for their envy blinded them to the light of love and charity." As I watched them, one of the souls turned toward us, though she could not see us, and said, "Who is this who walks among us with open eyes?" I answered, "I am alive, and walk this path to learn the way of salvation." The soul, astonished, said, "If you are truly alive, then I beg you, pray for me when you return to the world. I am Sapphire of Siena, and in life I was consumed by envy. I rejoiced in the misfortune of others, and now I pay the price for my sin. But before I died, I turned to God in repentance, and now I wait for my time to be purified." I promised to remember her, and as we spoke, I heard more voices in the air, this time chanting examples of envy's destruction. The first voice spoke of Cain, who killed his brother Abel out of envy for God's favor. The second voice told the story of Aglorus, who was turned to stone for envying the happiness of others. These examples filled the air, reminding the souls of the consequences of their sin. We continued walking, and as we moved forward, the voices grew fainter, fading into the background. Virgil said to me, "The souls of the envious must learn to rejoice in the good of others, for only through charity can they be freed from their blindness." I nodded, understanding that envy can only be overcome through love and generosity. We left the terrace behind and continued climbing, eager to reach the next level of the holy mountain. Canto 14. As we continued our climb, we reached the edge of the second terrace, and the voices of the envious grew faint, fading away behind us. Suddenly, two souls came forward, moving toward us as if they sensed our presence. Though their eyes were still sewn shut, they called out to us, "What is it that you seek, and who walks among us with open eyes?" Virgil turned to them and said, "These are travelers on the path to salvation. They seek to learn the way of love and humility." One of the souls, recognizing Virgil's words, said, "If you walk the way of love, then speak with us for a moment and help us understand our own sin." I asked Virgil if we could pause, and he agreed, so we turned to the two souls who stood before us, waiting to speak. The first soul said, "I am Guido del Duca, and in life I was consumed by envy. I could not bear to see others prosper, and I rejoiced in their downfall. Now I pay the price for my jealousy, and I wait for God's mercy to free me from this burden." The second soul, hearing Guido's confession, said, "I too was guilty of envy. I am Ranieri of Calboli, and in my heart I held hatred for the success of others. But now I see the emptiness of my ways, and I long for redemption." Guido continued, "If you return to the world above, remember the land of Romagna, for it was once a place of virtue and honor, but now it is consumed by greed and corruption. The noble families who once ruled with justice have fallen into wickedness, and the land has lost its former glory." I listened to Guido's lament, feeling sorry for the state of the world, for his words reminded me of the frailty of human virtue. Virgil, seeing my sorrow, said to the souls, "Go in peace, and trust in the mercy of God to heal your hearts." The souls bowed their heads, and we continued our ascent, leaving them behind. As we climbed higher, the path grew steeper, and the air seemed to grow thinner, as if we were approaching a higher plane of existence. I turned to Virgil and said, "Master, how far must we climb before we reach the summit?" He replied, "The way is long, but each step brings us closer to the light of heaven. Be patient, for the journey of the soul requires time and effort." I nodded, understanding that the path to salvation was not easy, but I was determined to continue. We reached the top of the second terrace and saw the way forward, leading us to the next level of purgatory, where more souls waited to be purified by love. Canto 15. The sun was now at its zenith, casting a brilliant light over the mountain, and as we climbed, the radiance of the sun filled me with a sense of peace and hope. Virgil turned to me and said, "The light you see is a reflection of the divine love that shines over all things. It is this love that guides the soul towards purification and redemption." As we walked, I thought about the nature of love and how it could be twisted into envy, as we had seen in the souls on the last terrace. But now, as we ascended to the third terrace, I felt a new understanding of how love in its purest form can lift the soul closer to God. When we reached the third terrace, we found it bathed in golden light. The air was sweet, and the ground seemed to glow with a gentle warmth. Here we encountered the souls of those who had been guilty of wrath in life, but now sought peace through love. They moved slowly, their eyes filled with the light of forgiveness, and I heard them singing softly, praising God for his mercy. As we walked among them, a voice from the air spoke, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God." These words filled my heart with joy, for they reminded me that the souls on this terrace were on the path to redemption, having turned their wrath into love. I asked Virgil, "Who are these souls, and what is their penance?" He replied, "These are the souls of the wrathful, those who, in life, allowed anger to consume their hearts. Now they are bathed in the light of peace, and must learn to forgive before they can ascend to heaven." As we continued, I saw a group of souls sitting together in silence, their faces turned toward the light. One of them looked up at me and said, "Who are you who walk amongst us with clear eyes?" I answered, "I am alive, and I walk this path to learn the way of salvation." The soul smiled and said, "Then you are truly blessed, for you still have time to turn from anger and embrace love." I asked him his name, and he replied, "I am Marco Lombardo, a man who, in life, struggled with anger and resentment, but now I have found peace in the love of God." I sat beside him for a moment, and we spoke of many things, of love, forgiveness, and the path to redemption. Marco said to me, "The world above is full of confusion, for people do not understand that the root of all sin is a lack of love. It is not the stars or fate that guide our actions, but our own free will. We choose whether to follow love or to turn away from it." His words resonated with me, for they reminded me that every soul has the power to choose, and that redemption is always possible through love and forgiveness. Virgil then urged me to rise, for it was time to continue our journey. We left the souls of the wrathful behind, their faces glowing in the light of peace, and began our ascent to the next terrace of the mountain. Canto 16. The sun had set behind the mountain, and we were now walking in the shadow, though the path ahead still glowed faintly with the light of the day. As we climbed, the darkness grew deeper, and I found myself stumbling, unable to see the way forward. Virgil, sensing my fear, reached out and took my hand, saying, "Do not be afraid. Though the light has faded, we are still guided by the love of God, which shines even in the darkest places." I felt comforted by his words, and together we continued our ascent. Suddenly, a voice called out to us from the darkness, saying, "Who are you who walks in the shadow without stumbling?" I answered, "I am alive, and I walk this path to learn the way of salvation." The voice replied, "If you are truly alive, then remember us when you return to the world, for we are the souls who were consumed by wrath. We are now surrounded by darkness, for our anger blinded us in life, and now we must find our way through the shadows of purgatory." I felt pity for these souls and promised to remember them in my prayers. As we continued walking, the voices of the souls grew clearer, and I recognized him as Marco Lombardo, the same soul I had spoken to earlier. Marco said to me, "Listen carefully, for I will tell you of the source of the world's confusion. In life, people blame the stars for their misfortune. They do not understand that the true cause of their suffering is their own free will. God has given each soul the power to choose, to follow the path of love or to turn away from it. But many are misled by their own desires, and they fall into anger, envy, and pride. It is not stars that guide our actions, but our own choices. We are responsible for our own salvation, and it is only through love and forgiveness that we can find our way to God. I listened carefully to his words, for they seemed to hold the key to understanding the trials of purgatory. Virgil, sensing my thoughts, said to me, "Do you see now how the souls of the wrathful must learn the lesson of free will? In life they allowed their anger to control their actions, but now they must learn to choose love over hatred and violence." I nodded, for the truth of Marco's words was clear to me. We continued our ascent, and as we climbed, the darkness began to lift, and the light of dawn appeared on the horizon. The souls of the wrathful remained behind, still struggling to find their way through the shadows of their own anger, but I felt hopeful that they would one day be freed from the darkness of their sin. We reached the top of the terrace and saw the path ahead, leading us to the next level of the mountain, where more souls awaited their purification through love. Canto 17. As we climbed higher, we reached the point where the sun's rays hit us directly, blinding me for a moment with their brilliance. I covered my eyes, but Virgil said to me, "Look around, for we have reached the place where the soul is purified from the sin of wrath." I stood at the entrance to the fourth terrace, and as I looked out, I saw the souls of the wrathful being cleansed by the power of love. Before I could take it all in, Virgil spoke again. "Now I must explain to you the nature of love, for it is the force that drives the soul both toward good and toward evil." He continued, "Love is the force that moves all things. Every soul is drawn to love, but the way in which it loves determines whether it ascends to heaven or falls into sin. There are three kinds of love that lead the soul astray. First, the love that turns to evil, that seeks to harm others or take pleasure in wickedness. This is the love that leads to pride, envy, and wrath. Second, there is the love that clings too tightly to earthly goods, turning the soul away from God and toward the material world. And finally, there is the love that seeks the good, but too weakly, failing to strive for the higher divine love that leads to true salvation." I listened carefully, for Virgil's words were full of wisdom, and they helped me to understand the purpose of the trials in purgatory. He continued, "Here, the souls of the wrathful learn to channel their love in the right way, to turn away from God and hatred and toward the love of God and their fellow souls. Now we will see how love is purified and made whole again." We stepped forward, and I saw the souls sitting in the sunlight, bathed in its warmth and light. They were peaceful, their faces turned upward as if they were absorbing the divine love that flowed over them. As I watched, I heard voices in the air singing of examples of wrath that had been overcome by love. The first voice spoke the story of Mary, who, when faced with cruelty, responded with love, praying for the salvation of her enemies. The second voice told of Stephen, who, as he was being stoned to death, prayed for his persecutors, asking God to forgive them for their ignorance. These examples filled the air, teaching the souls the power of forgiveness and the strength of love in the face of anger and violence. Virgil turned to me and said, "Do you see now how love can overcome wrath? And it is through acts of mercy and forgiveness that the soul is purified and made worthy of heaven." I nodded, for the lesson was clear. We left the terrace behind and continued climbing, eager to reach the next level of the mountain, where the trials of love would continue. Canto 18. As we ascended further, I reflected on the words Virgil had spoken, and I was eager to understand more about the nature of love. I turned to my guide and asked, "Master, you have told me that love is the force that moves all things. But how does love itself begin? What causes the soul to love?" Virgil replied, "My son, you must know that love is a natural inclination given to every soul by God. It is the source of all desire, and the soul is always drawn to whatever seems good or pleasing. But the will, which is the higher part of the soul, can direct love toward what is truly good, or it can allow love to be misguided by earthly desires. When the will is weak, love becomes disordered, and the soul turns to pride, envy, and wrath. But when the will is strong, love is guided toward the divine, and the soul ascends towards heaven." I listened carefully, for Virgil's words helped me understand the trials we had witnessed on the terraces below. He continued, This is why the souls in purgatory must undergo purification, for their love has been misdirected, and they must learn to love rightly before they can enter heaven. We reached the top of the path and stepped onto the 5th terrace, where the sin of sloth is purged. Here the souls were running, moving swiftly in a great circle as if they were driven by a burning desire to make up for the time they had lost. They called out to one another as they ran, urging each other on with cries of, "Hurry, do not waste a moment, for we must run toward the light of God." I asked Virgil, "Who are these souls, and why do they run with such urgency?" He replied, "These are the souls of the slothful, those who in life were slow to act in love, or who neglected the good that they could have done. Now they are filled with a burning desire to make up for their laziness, and they must run until they are purified." As I watched them, I felt a sense of awe at their determination, for they moved with such speed and energy that it seemed as if they were carried by the very force of love. Suddenly, 2 voices rang out in the air, speaking of examples of zeal and diligence. The first voice spoke of the Virgin Mary, who, when she learned that she would bear the Christ, hurried to visit her cousin Elizabeth, driven by love and service. The second voice told of Caesar, who, out of a zeal for the glory of Rome, led his army swiftly across the Alps to secure victory for his people. These examples of action and devotion spurred the souls onwards, urging them to run faster as if they were racing toward the light of God. I turned to Virgil and said, "Do you see how their love drives them to action? It is as if they were making up for all the time they wasted in life." He nodded and said, "This is the power of love when it is rightly directed. It moves the soul toward the good, and it gives it the strength to act with zeal and purpose." We continued walking along the terrace, watching the souls of the slothful as they ran in their circle, driven by their desire for redemption. Canto 19. It was the hour when the dawn begins to chase away the shadows of the night, and I found myself in a dream, sinking into a deep and restful sleep. In my dream, I saw a woman standing before me. Her voice was sweet, and she spoke softly, saying, "I am the siren, the one who has led many astray with my beauty and song." At first she seemed fair to behold, but as she continued speaking, her voice became shrill, and her appearance grew grotesque. She tried to lure me with her words, saying, "Come to me, I will give you all that you desire." But suddenly a bright and shining figure appeared, standing beside me. It was my guide, Virgil, and he struck the siren with his hand, breaking her spell and freeing me from her deceit. I woke from the dream, breathing heavily, and saw Virgil standing over me. He said, "Rise, for the morning has come, and we must continue our journey." I stood and gathered my strength, grateful to be free from the siren's temptation. Together we began our ascent to the next terrace of purgatory. As we climbed, I asked Virgil, "Master, what was the meaning of the dream I just had? Why did the siren appear to me, and how did her appearance change?" Virgil replied, "The siren represents the false allure of earthly desires. At first she appears beautiful, for the soul is often deceived by the pleasures of the world. But as her song continues, her true nature is revealed, and the soul sees her for what she truly is, a source of corruption and destruction. You must always be on your guard against the temptations of the world, for they can lead the soul astray and turn it away from the path of light." I nodded, understanding now how the dream had been a warning to stay vigilant and true on my journey towards salvation. We reached the next terrace, where the sin of avarice is purged. Here the souls lie face down on the ground, stretched out with their arms spread wide, as if they were clinging to the earth. They wept and cried out, "Why did we hold so tightly to the things of the world? Why did we put our trust in wealth instead of in the love of God?" Their lamentations filled the air, and I felt great pity for them. They had been bound by their greed in life, and now they lay imprisoned by the very earth they had loved. I asked Virgil, "Who are these souls, and what is their penance?" He replied, "These are the souls of the avaricious, those who in life clung too tightly to material wealth and neglected the love of God. Now they must lie face down, pressed to the earth, until they are freed from their attachment to worldly goods." As we walked among them, I heard a voice call out to me, and I turned to see a soul lying at my feet. He said, "I am Pope Adrian V, and I too was guilty of avarice. Though I held the highest office in the church, I was consumed by the love of wealth. But in my final days, I turned to God in repentance, and now I lie here, seeking his mercy. I felt deep sorrow for him, for his position had not saved him from the sin of greed, and now he was learning the true value of humility and love. Virgil then urged me onward, and we continued our climb, leaving behind the souls of the avaricious, as they lay prostrate before the earth. Canto 20. I felt the weight of the souls' lamentations as we left the terrace of the avaricious behind, and their cries still echoed in my ears as we continued our ascent. Virgil walked beside me, and I asked him, Master, why is avarice so strong a sin that it binds the souls to the earth in this way? He replied, Avarice is a love misplaced, a love of things that pass rather than a love of God who endures forever. When a soul clings too tightly to the wealth of the world, it loses sight of the higher good and becomes weighed down by its greed. But here in Purgatory, the souls must learn to release their attachment and lift their hearts towards heaven. As we climbed higher, I heard the voices of the souls singing, and their song was full of sorrow, but also hope. They sang of examples of generosity, praising those who in life had given freely of their wealth and their love. The first voice told the story of Mary, who gave birth to Christ in a humble manger, though she was worthy of a royal throne. The second voice spoke of Fabricius, a Roman who lived a simple life, choosing virtue over riches and rejecting bribes for the sake of justice. As these examples filled the air, I felt the weight of their lessons, for they showed the power of selflessness and the freedom that comes from letting go of material desire. Suddenly, I heard a cry from one of the souls, and I turned to see a man lying face down on the ground, weeping bitterly. He said, Why did I trust in wealth and turn away from the face and the love of God? Now I lie here, bound by the very earth I once worshipped. I knelt beside him and asked, Who are you, and what brings you to this place? He replied, I am Hugh Capet. Once the king of France, I built my kingdom on the riches of the world, and I allowed greed to rule my heart. But now I see the emptiness of my wealth and power, and I long only for the mercy of God. I felt great sorrow for him, for he had ruled with might and wealth, but now lay humbled before the earth. He continued, If you return to the world above, tell my descendants to beware of avarice, for it has already consumed many others, and they are falling deeper into sin. Their love of wealth will be their undoing, unless they turn back to the path of virtue. I promised to remember his words, and as I stood, the voices of the souls rose once more, chanting examples of those who had been destroyed by greed. The first voice spoke of Pygmalion, whose love of gold led him to treachery and murder, until his own greed consumed him. The second voice told the story of Midas, who wished for everything he touched to turn to gold, but was cursed when even his food and drink became lifeless metal. These examples of destruction and sorrow filled the terrace, reminding the souls of the danger of avarice and the need for humility and generosity. Virgil then urged me onward, and we continued our ascent, leaving the souls of the avaricious behind as they lay bound by the earth they had once loved too dearly. Canto 21. We continued climbing the mountain, leaving behind the souls of the avaricious, and soon the path became less steep, as if we were approaching a place of rest. As we walked, I suddenly heard a voice from behind us, speaking in a joyful tone. Wait for me, for I too see the light of heaven. I turned and saw a soul approaching us, moving quickly and with a light step, as if we were filled with eagerness to join us on our journey. He greeted us with a smile, and I saw that his face was radiant with the light of joy. Virgil, seeing the soul approach, turned to him and said, Who are you, and why do you walk with such joy? The soul replied, I am Statius, and I have just been freed from the pains of purgatory. I have spent many years here, but now I am ready to ascend to heaven, for my time of purification is complete. I was amazed to hear his words, for I knew of Statius, the great poet, whose works had been admired by many in the world above. I said to him, Statius, you are truly blessed to be so near the gates of heaven, but tell me, how did you come to this place, and what sin did you atone for? Statius smiled and replied, I was guilty of the sin of prodigality. I squandered my wealth and talents in pursuit of earthly pleasures, and neglected the higher good of love and virtue. But in my heart I always admired the works of Virgil, and his words helped guide me towards repentance and faith. It was through his poetry that I came to know the truth of God, and I was baptized in secret, for I lived in a time when Christianity was still persecuted. At these words, Virgil looked at Statius with surprise, and I could see that he was deeply moved to learn that his own writings had played a part in Statius' salvation. Statius continued, "Though I lived as a Christian, I was still bound by my attachment to worldly things, and so I came to Purgatory to be purified of my sins. But now at last I am free to ascend to heaven, and I rejoice in the mercy of God." I felt a great sense of joy for Statius, for he had found redemption through faith and love. As we continued walking, Statius and Virgil spoke together of poetry and faith, and I listened in awe, for I was in the presence of two great poets, whose works had inspired countless souls. Soon we reached the level part of the path, where the air was clean and pure, and the light of heaven seemed nearer. Statius turned to us and said, "Let us rest here for a moment, for we are close to the gates of heaven, and soon I will leave this place behind to enter the eternal joy of paradise." Canto 22. As we began our journey again, Statius walked beside us, his face still shining with joy at the nearness of heaven. He turned to Virgil and said, "My master, it was your Aeneid that first led me to the truth, for it was in your words that I found the seeds of faith. Though I was a pagan by birth, the wisdom of your poetry opened my heart to God, and I began to see that true salvation lay in the love and mercy of Christ." Virgil listened in silence, his face filled with wonder and humility, for he had never imagined that his words would have had such an effect on a soul like Statius. As we walked, I felt a deep sense of gratitude for the power of poetry and art, for they had the ability to lead souls to truth and salvation. We soon came to the next terrace, where the sin of gluttony is purged. Here the souls walk among trees heavy with fruit, and though the fruit was ripe and abundant, the souls could not reach it. They stretched out their hands, reaching for the fruit, but as soon as they came near, the branches lifted away, keeping the souls from indulging in their earthly desires. I turned to Virgil and asked, "Master, who are these souls, and what is their penance?" He replied, "These are the souls of the gluttonous, those who in life were consumed by their love of food and drink. Now they must learn to deny their appetites, for only through temperance can they be freed from their sin." As we walked among them, I heard a voice call out, and I turned to see a soul standing beneath one of the trees. He said, "Oh, you who walk with open eyes, if you truly seek to understand, listen to my story. I am Forese Donati, a man who in life indulged too much in the pleasures of the table. But in my final days, I turned to God in repentance, and now I seek his mercy through the discipline of fasting." I was moved by his words, for he spoke with such humility and sorrow for his sin. As we continued walking, I heard more voices in the air, chanting examples of temperance and moderation. The first voice spoke of Mary, who, though she was the mother of Christ, lived a life of simplicity and humility, never seeking to indulge in earthly pleasures. The second voice told the story of John the Baptist, who lived in the wilderness, surviving on honey and locusts and devoting his life to the service of God. These examples of temperance filled the terrace, reminding the souls of the need to control their desires and seek the higher good. We walked on, watching the souls of the gluttonous as they reached for the fruit that was always just out of their grasp. Virgil turned to me and said, "Do you see how their love has been purified? Once they were ruled by their appetites, but now they learn to deny themselves for the sake of God's love." I nodded, for I understood that true freedom came not from indulgence, but from discipline and self-control. We continued our ascent, leaving the terrace of the gluttonous behind, and moving ever closer to the summit of the holy mountain. Canto 23. We continued our climb, moving away from the terrace of the gluttonous. The air grew clearer, and the light of heaven seemed closer, filling me with hope and strength. As we walked, I suddenly heard a voice calling out, and the sound was familiar to my ears. I turned and saw a soul approaching, thin and gaunt, but with a joyful expression on his face. He called out to me again, and I recognized him as Forese Donati, a friend from my past life, though he had been consumed by gluttony in life. Now his appearance reflected the discipline and fasting he had embraced in purgatory. We embraced, and Pharisee said to me, Dante, my brother, it is a joy to see you here, walking the path towards salvation. Though we were separated in life, we are now united in this journey toward God. I smiled and replied, Pharisee, my friend, I am glad to see you have found your way to redemption through the mercy of God. Tell me, how long have you been here, and how have you progressed? Pharisee looked at me with a peaceful expression and said, I have been here for some time, enduring the penance of hunger and thirst for the sin of gluttony. But through the prayers of my wife, Nella, I have been able to ascend more quickly, for her love and devotion has helped lift me from my burden. I was moved by his words, for they reminded me of the power of prayer and the love that extends beyond the grave. As he continued speaking, Pharisee pointed to a group of souls nearby, saying, Look there, but those are the souls of others who are guilty of the same sin. But now they are learning to deny their appetites and seek the higher good of heaven. I watched as the souls walked slowly and deliberately, their eyes fixed on the fruit above them, though they made no effort to grasp it. Pharisee continued, The fruit you see is not meant to tempt us, but to remind us of the discipline we must embrace. We no longer hunger for earthly pleasures, but for the love of God, which alone can satisfy the soul. As we spoke, I heard the voices of the souls around us, singing hymns of praise and calling out examples of temperance and moderation. The first voice spoke of the Virgin Mary, who, at the wedding feast in Cana, asked for wine not for herself but for others, showing her selflessness and care. The second voice told of the Roman matron, who refused to drink wine, choosing to live in moderation for the sake of virtue. These examples filled the air, reminding the souls of the importance of temperance and the need to control their desires. Pharisee turned to me and said, Remember, Dante, that we are here to be purified, to let go of our earthly attachments and embrace the love of God. I nodded, understanding now that the journey through purgatory was not just about penance, but about transformation and renewal. Virgil then urged me to continue, and I said my farewells to Pharisee, promising to keep him in my prayers. We began our ascent once more, climbing higher toward the summit of the mountain, where the light of heaven shone ever brighter. Canto 24. We climbed higher, and the air became even clearer, filled with a light that felt closer to the purity of heaven. As we ascended, we encountered a group of souls who were walking slowly, their bodies emaciated from fasting, but their faces glowing with quiet joy. One of the souls recognized me and approached with a smile, saying, You are Dante, and by your appearance I see that you are still alive. But tell me, what brings you to this place, and how have you come to walk among us? I looked at him closely and soon realized that it was Bonagianti da Lucia, a poet I had known in life. I greeted him warmly, glad to see him in this place of redemption. I replied, I have been granted the grace to journey through the realms of the afterlife, so that I may learn the way of salvation. Bonagiantas nodded and asked me, Tell me, Dante, is it your style of poetry that has made such a stir in the world above? For I have heard of your work, and it seems to follow a new path. I smiled and said, Yes, it is true. My poetry seeks to express the true nature of love, as it comes from the heart and leads the soul to God. Bonagiantas sighed softly and said, Now I see the difference between your work and mine. I followed the old style, where love was praised in an earthly, human way, but your poetry seeks a higher love, one that lifts the soul toward heaven. I felt a deep sense of gratitude for his understanding, and I could see that Bonagianta had gained wisdom through his time in purgatory. We spoke for a while longer, discussing poetry and the nature of love, and I was glad to share this moment with a fellow poet who had found his way to redemption. As we continued our ascent, I saw another group of souls who were walking with more energy, their eyes fixed on the path ahead, as if they were eager to reach the summit of the mountain. These souls were filled with zeal, and I heard them calling out to one another, urging each other to hurry so that they could ascend more quickly. I asked Virgil, Who are these souls, and why do they move with such urgency? He replied, These are the souls of those who were guilty of sloth in life. They neglected their duties and were slow to act in love. Now they are filled with a burning desire to make up the time they lost, and they must run until they are purified. As I watched them, I felt a deep sense of admiration for their determination, for they had embraced the lesson of zeal and were eager to be cleansed of their sin. I heard their voices calling out examples of diligence and of devotion, reminding themselves and each other of the power of love in action. The first voice spoke of Mary, who, after learning that she would bear the Christ, hurried to visit her cousin Elizabeth, showing her love and service through her actions. The second voice told of Julius Caesar, who led his armies swiftly across the Alps, driven by his desire to serve Rome and secure victory for his people. These examples of action and zeal filled the terrace, encouraging the souls to continue their journey with energy and purpose. Virgil then urged me to move on, for we were nearing the next terrace, and there were still many lessons to learn on our path to salvation. Canto 25. The hour was advancing, and the light of day filled the sky as we continued climbing the mountain. As we walked, I pondered the nature of the soul, for I had seen how the souls in purgatory still suffered physical pain and hunger, even though they no longer had earthly bodies. I turned to Virgil and asked, "Master, how can these souls feel hunger and thirst when they no longer have their earthly forms?" Virgil looked at me kindly, sensing the depth of my question, and replied, "You must understand, my son, that the soul, after death, takes on a form that reflects its inner state. Though it no longer has a physical body, it still retains the memories and desires of its earthly life. This is why the souls in purgatory feel hunger, thirst, and other sensations, for they are still bound by their memories of the flesh, and they must be purified before they can be freed from these earthly attachments." As Virgil spoke, I felt a new understanding of the nature of the soul, and I realized that the process of purification in purgatory was not just about cleansing the sins of the flesh, but about freeing the soul from the desires that had once controlled it. As we climbed higher, we reached the next terrace, where the sin of lust is purged. Here the souls walked through a wall of fire, their faces filled with both fear and determination. The flames rose high, but the souls pressed on, knowing that the fire would cleanse them of their sin and make them worthy of heaven. I watched in awe as the souls entered the fire, and though the flames licked their bodies, they did not falter in their journey. I turned to Virgil and said, "Master, why must the souls pass through fire to be purified of lust?" He replied, "Lust is a sin that burns in the heart, consuming the soul with desire. Only through the fire of purification can the soul be cleansed of this burning passion and made pure once more." As we stood watching, a voice called out to us from within the flames, and I saw a soul approaching, his body glowing with the heat of the fire. He said, "O you who walk this path, if you seek to understand, listen to my story. In life, I was consumed by the sin of lust, allowing my desires to control me, but now I walk through this fire, seeking the mercy of God to cleanse my soul and make me worthy of his love." I asked him his name, and he replied, "I am Guido Guinizelli, a poet who in life sang of love and desire, but my love was too focused on the pleasures of the flesh, and now I must pass through this fire to be purified." I felt great pity for him, but though he had been a poet of love, he had allowed his desires to lead him astray. We spoke for a while, and I listened as Guido told me of his journey through purgatory, and how he had learned the true meaning of love, a love that is pure, free from earthly desires, and directed only toward God. As we continued talking, I heard more voices from within the flames, calling out examples of chastity and purity. The first voice spoke of Mary, who, though she was chosen to bear the Christ, remained pure and devoted to God, never allowing her love to be tainted by earthly desires. The second voice told of Diana, who chose to live a life of chastity and virtue, dedicating herself wholly to the service of the divine. These examples filled the air, reminding the souls of the importance of purity and the need to control their desires. Virgil then urged me to move on. There was still much to learn, and the summit of the mountain was now within sight. Canto 26. As we continued our climb, I was filled with a sense of anticipation. The summit of the mountain was near, and the air was filled with a brightness that seemed to grow stronger with every step. As we approached the flames, I saw the soul of the lustful moving through the fire, their voices raised in song as they purified themselves in their desires. The heat of the fire was intense, but the souls pressed forward, for they knew that this was the final trial before they could ascend to heaven. As I stood watching, I heard a voice from within the flames calling out to me with joy. It was the voice of another poet, one whose works I had admired in life. I turned and saw the soul of Arnaud Daniel, a troubadour from Provence, who had sung of love and passion in his poetry. He came forward, his body glowing with the heat of the fire, but his face filled with peace and humility. He said to me, "O you who walk this path, if you truly seek to understand love, listen to my story. In life I was consumed by the desire for love, but my love was misguided, directed too much toward the pleasures of the flesh. Now I must pass through this fire, seeking to be cleansed in my desires, so that I may love purely and freely, with my heart set on the divine." I was moved by his words, for Arnaud had been a poet who understood the nature of love, and now he was learning the higher truth of divine love. We spoke for a time, and Arnaud told me of his journey through purgatory, how he had to learn to let go of his earthly attachments and embrace the love of God. He said to me, "Though I once sang of earthly love, I now see that true love is found only in God, for it is through him that the soul is made whole." As we spoke, I heard more voices from within the flames, chanting examples of purity and chastity. The first voice spoke of the Virgin Mary, who remained pure and devoted to God even as she bore the Christ. Her love was selfless, focused only on the divine. The second voice told of the Roman matron, who chose to live a life of chastity, dedicating herself to virtue rather than indulging in earthly desires. These examples filled the air, reminding the souls of the importance of purity and the need to control their desires. Virgil then turned to me and said, "We are nearing the end of our journey. The summit of the mountain is close, but you must pass through the flames before you can continue." I hesitated for a moment, for the fire before me seemed overwhelming, but I knew that I had to face this trial to complete my journey. Virgil encouraged me, saying, "Do not fear, the fire will not harm you. It is the fire of purification, and it will cleanse you as it has cleansed the souls before you." With his words giving me strength, I stepped into the flames, and though the heat was intense, I felt no pain. Instead, I felt a sense of relief, as if the fire was burning away the last remnants of my earthly attachments. As I passed through the flames, I emerged on the other side, filled with a new sense of peace and purity. Virgil smiled at me and said, "You have passed the final trial, and now you are ready to ascend to the heights of the mountain where you will be greeted by the light of heaven." Canto 27. As we emerged from the flames, I felt a sense of freedom that I had never known before. It was as if the fire had purified my soul, lifting away the last of my earthly burdens and filling me with peace and clarity. The air was fresh and pure, and I could see the summit of the mountains before us, bathed in the light of heaven. Virgil turned to me with a look of joy, saying, "My son, you have passed the final trial, and now the way is open for you to ascend to the realm of paradise." I looked at him with gratitude, for he had been my guide and protector through all the trials of purgatory, and I could not have reached this point without him. As we continued walking, we came to a beautiful garden filled with flowers and trees, and the air was sweet with the scent of blossoms. In the center of the garden, a small stream of pure water flowed, its gentle sound filling the air with peace. Standing at the entrance to the garden was an angel, dressed in robes as bright as the sun. He smiled at us and said, "This is the Garden of Eden, where the souls of the blessed prepare to enter the gates of heaven. Here you may rest for a time and refresh your soul before continuing your journey." I felt a deep sense of awe, for this was the place where humanity had first walked in innocence before the fall into sin. And now, after passing through the trials of purgatory, I stood at the very threshold of the divine. Virgil turned to me and said, "My son, I have brought you this far, but now you must continue on your own. For my role as your guide ends here, and another will lead you into the realms of paradise." I was filled with sorrow at the thought of parting from Virgil, for he had been my constant companion through the darkness of hell and the trials of purgatory, but I knew that this was the will of heaven, that I must now follow my own path toward the divine. With a gentle smile, Virgil said, "Do not grieve, for now you are ready to ascend to the highest heights of heaven. Your journey is just beginning, and you will soon see the light of God in all its glory." As I stood there in the Garden of Eden, I felt the presence of a new guide approaching, and I knew that the next part of my journey would lead me to the realms of paradise. The angel at the entrance of the garden opened the gate for me, and I stepped inside, filled with a sense of wonder and anticipation for what lay ahead. Canto 28. I entered the garden and found myself in a place of such beauty that words can scarcely describe it. The air was filled with the fragrance of flowers, and the soft sound of a stream flowing through the trees filled my ears with peace. It was the Garden of Eden, the place where humanity had once lived in innocence before the fall from grace. As I walked deeper into the garden, I saw trees laden with fruit, their branches swaying gently in the breeze. The grass beneath my feet was soft, and the flowers bloomed in every colour imaginable. I followed the path that wound through the garden, and soon came to the edge of the stream, its waters so clear that I could see the pebbles at the bottom. As I stood by the stream, a woman appeared on the other side, walking with grace and beauty. Her robes shimmered in the sunlight, and her presence filled the air with serenity. She spoke to me in a voice that was gentle and filled with wisdom, saying, "Welcome to the Garden of Eden, the earthly paradise. I am Matilda, and I tend to this garden, helping those who pass through to prepare for their journey to heaven." I was struck by her beauty and kindness, and I asked her, "Matilda, tell me about this place, for I have heard of it in the scriptures, but now I see it with my own eyes." Matilda smiled and said, "This is the place where the first humans, Adam and Eve, lived in perfect harmony with God. Here there is no sorrow, no pain, only the peace and joy that comes from being close to the divine." She continued, "The water you see before you is the stream of Lethe, which washes away the memory of sin. All who pass through this garden must drink from its waters to be purified before entering heaven." I listened to her words with reverence, for I understood that this was the final step in the process of purification. After all the trials of purgatory, the souls who reached this place would be cleansed of the memory of their sins and made ready for the eternal joy of paradise. Matilda then invited me to cross the stream and join her, and as I stepped into the water, I felt a cool, refreshing sensation that seemed to cleanse my very soul. On the other side, Matilda smiled and said, "You are now ready to continue your journey. But first, you must drink from another stream, the stream of which will restore the memory of all the good you have done in life, so that you may carry it with you into heaven." She led me to the stream of and I drank from its waters and felt a great wave of joy and peace wash over me. All the good deeds of my life came back to me in a flood of memories, and I was filled with a sense of fulfillment and hope. Matilda looked at me with kindness and said, "Now you are truly ready. The path to heaven lies before you, and soon you will see the divine light that shines all over creation." I felt a deep sense of gratitude for Matilda and for the beauty of the Garden of Eden. This was the place where humanity had first walked with God, and now, after all the trials and tribulations, I stood on the threshold of paradise. Canto 29. As I stood in the Garden of Eden, still marveling at its beauty, I saw a bright light approaching from the distance, moving slowly through the trees. The light grew stronger, and soon I heard the sound of voices singing, a melody so pure and sweet that it seemed to come from heaven itself. I turned to Matilda and asked, "What is this light, and what are the voices that I hear?" She smiled and said, "This is a procession of the blessed, the souls who have been purified and are now ready to ascend to heaven. They are led by the divine light, which guides them towards the eternal joy of paradise." I watched in awe as the procession came close, and soon I could see the souls, dressed in robes of white, walking in perfect harmony. At the front of the procession were 7 golden candlesticks, their flames burning brightly in the clear air of the garden. Behind the candlesticks came 24 elders, each wearing a crown of lilies, and their voices rose in song, praising the glory of God. I listened to their hymn, and the words filled my heart with joy. "Blessed are you, O Lord, who sits upon the throne of heaven, and whose light shines over all creation." As the procession passed, I saw more souls walking in its train, each one filled with the light of divine grace. Their faces shone with peace, and their steps were light, as if they were already walking in heaven. Then behind them came 4 living creatures, each one with the face of a lion, an ox, a man, and an eagle. They moved with a sense of majesty and power, and their wings were covered in eyes, reflecting the all-seeing wisdom of God. Next in the procession came a chariot, drawn by a griffin, half eagle, half lion, symbolizing the dual nature of Christ, who is both divine and human. The chariot was covered with flowers, and inside sat a beautiful woman, clothed in a red robe with a crown of olive leaves upon her head. Matilda turned to me and said, "This is Beatrice, the one who will guide you on the final part of your journey. She is the embodiment of divine wisdom, and she will lead you into the light of heaven." I was overwhelmed with emotion, for Beatrice was the woman I had loved in life, and now, after all the trials of my journey, I would see her again. As the procession drew near, I felt a deep sense of awe and reverence, for this was the culmination of my journey, the moment where I would be reunited with Beatrice and begin the ascent to paradise. The procession stopped before me, and the souls and angels stood in silence, their eyes fixed on the chariot. Then the woman in the chariot, Beatrice, rose and looked at me with eyes filled with wisdom and love. I was filled with a mixture of sorrow and joy, for though I had longed to see her, I knew that I was still unworthy of her presence. Beatrice spoke, her voice gentle yet firm, saying, "Dante, why do you hesitate? You have come this far, and now the way is open for you to ascend to heaven. But first you must cleanse your heart of all that remains of sin, for only a pure soul can enter the gates of paradise." Her words struck me deeply, for I realized that though I had passed through the trials of purgatory, there was still a need for further purification. Matilda smiled and said, "Do not fear, for you are near the end of your journey. Soon you will be ready to see the light of God in all its glory." Canto 30. As the procession halted before me, the air was filled with a reverent silence. All eyes were turned toward Beatrice, who stood in the chariot, her face radiant with divine light. I felt a deep sense of awe and sorrow. The sight of her stirred emotions that I had long kept hidden within my heart. Her beauty was beyond anything I had ever known, and yet I knew that I was unworthy to stand before her. She looked at me with a piercing gaze, and her voice was both gentle and firm as she spoke my name. "Dante." At that moment, I felt as though all my strength had left me, and I fell to my knees, overcome by the weight of her presence. Beatrice continued, "Dante, why do you turn away? Why do you hide your face from me? Have you forgotten the path you once followed, the love what you once knew? You have come this far, but you must still confront the truth of your own heart." Her words struck me deeply, and I felt a flood of shame for the sins and errors I had committed in life. Though I had journeyed through hell and purgatory, there were still wounds within my soul that had not yet healed. Beatrice continued, "Do you not remember how you once followed after me, guided by the love and wisdom that I sought to share with you? But you allowed yourself to be led astray by false desires, turning away from the path of virtue and seeking pleasure in the things of the world." Her words were a reproach, but they were also filled with compassion, and I realized that this moment was a test of my soul, a final confrontation with the truth before I could ascend to paradise. I tried to speak, but the weight of my sorrow held me silent, and I could only weep, feeling the full burden of my failures. After that moment, the angels surrounding us began to sing, their voices filling the air with a hymn of divine love and mercy. The song lifted my heart, and though I wept, I felt a glimmer of hope, a sense that, despite my unworthiness, I could still find redemption. Beatrice spoke again, her voice softer now, saying, "Dante, do not be afraid to face your past, for only by confronting the truth can you be purified. You must drink deeply from the waters of repentance, and then you will be ready to enter the gates of heaven." At her words, Matilda stepped forward, leading me to the waters of the stream of Lethe, which flowed gently through the garden. This was the stream that washed away the memory of sin, and I knew that it was the final step in my purification. As I knelt by the water, I cupped my hands and drank, feeling its cool, refreshing touch flow through me. Immediately, I felt a sense of release, as if the weight of my past had been lifted from my soul. The memories of my sins began to fade, replaced by a sense of peace and clarity. When I rose from the stream, Beatrice smiled at me, and I knew that I had passed the test. The angels continued their song, and the light of heaven seemed closer than ever, filling the garden with its radiance. Beatrice then spoke again, her voice filled with love, saying, "Dante, you are now ready. The way to paradise is open, and I will be your guide as you ascend to the divine." At her words, I felt a surge of joy, for I knew that the final part of my journey was about to begin. Canto 31. Beatrice stood before me, her gaze as steady as the stars, and her voice so gentle bore the weight of truth and judgment. She said, "Dante, you have passed through many trials, and now you stand here, freed from the memory of your sins. There is still more to be done, for your heart must be purified of all that it has turned away from the divine." Her words pierced my soul, and I felt a deep sense of sorrow, for I knew that I had fallen short of the love that she had always represented. She continued, "Do you remember, Dante, the moment you first turned away from me, when you allowed yourself to be led astray by the fleeting pleasures of the world? You lost sight of the true path, and sought fulfillment in things that could never satisfy." I bowed my head, ashamed of my failings, for her words brought back memories of all the times I had turned from virtue in pursuit of empty desires. Beatrice's voice softened, but it still held the power of truth, as she said, "But though you were led astray, you have been given a second chance. Now you must fully surrender your heart to the love of God, for only then will you be ready to ascend to paradise." I looked up at her, my eyes filled with tears, and said, "Beatrice, I have wandered far from the path, but I have always held the memory of you in my heart. You were the light that guided me, even in my darkest moments, and now I stand before you, seeking your forgiveness." Beatrice smiled gently and said, "Dante, the love I represent is not mine to give or withhold, but the love of God, which is always available to those who truly repent. Your journey through purgatory has brought you closer to that love, and now you are ready to drink from the waters of you know, which will restore the memory of all the good you have done in life." At her words, Matilda stepped forward once more, leading me to the stream of you know, where I knelt to drink. As the cool water touched my lips, a wave of peace washed over me, and all the good deeds and moments from my life returned to my memory. I was filled with a sense of joy and fulfillment, for now I could see that even in my moments of weakness, there had been goodness in my heart. When I rose from the stream, Beatrice stood before me, her face radiant with divine light. I felt a surge of love and gratitude, for I knew that my soul had been fully purified. The angels began to sing once more, their voices rising in a hymn of praise and joy, and I knew that the time had come for me to ascend to paradise. Beatrice extended her hand to me, and I took it, feeling the warmth of her presence flow through me. She said, "Dante, you are now ready to enter paradise. The love of God will guide you, and I will walk with you as you ascend to the highest heights of heaven." With those words, we began our ascent, climbing the final steps of the holy mountain toward the gates of paradise, where the light of God shone in all its glory. Canto 32. As we ascended hand in hand, Beatrice led me toward the heights, where the light of heaven shone ever brighter. The air was filled with a sense of peace, and the songs of the angels echoed around us. We came to a stop at the summit of the mountain, where a great tree stood, its branches wide and strong, filled with fruit and flowers. The tree was unlike any I had ever seen, its roots dug deep into the earth, and its branches reaching toward the sky, as if both were grounded in the earth and reaching for heaven. Beatrice turned to me and said, "This tree represents the redemption that comes from the divine. It is the symbol of the cross, the point where heaven and earth meet, and through it, the souls of the blessed and nourished and made whole." As I stood gazing at the tree, I saw a procession approaching, the same procession of elders, angels, and saints that I had witnessed before. The 24 elders, representing the books of the Old Testaments, sang hymns of praise, their voices rising in joy. Behind them came the 4 living creatures, symbolizing the Gospels. At the center of the procession was a chariot, drawn by the griffin, half eagle, half lion, symbolizing Christ in his twofold nature, divine and human. The procession stopped before the tree, and the elders and saints bowed in reverence. At that moment, I felt the presence of God drawing nearer, and I knew that I was standing at the threshold of paradise. Beatrice, still holding my hand, led me to the base of the tree, where we knelt together in prayer. The light of the divine shone down upon us, and I felt a profound sense of peace and fulfillment. As we knelt, I heard a voice from the heavens proclaiming, "This is the tree of life, the source of all goodness and grace. Through it, the world is redeemed, and the souls of the blessed are nourished with the love of God." The voice filled the air, and the angels and saints sang in response, their voices lifting in a hymn of praise. As I knelt before the tree, I felt the weight of my journey fall away, and I knew that the trials of purgatory had come to an end. I was ready to enter paradise. Beatrice rose and smiled at me, her face radiant with the light of divine love. She said, "Dante, you have completed the journey of purification. Now you are ready to enter the eternal joy of heaven. But remember that it is through the love of God and the sacrifice of the cross that all things are made new." With these words, the chariot began to move once more, carrying the souls of the blessed towards the gate of paradise. Beatrice and I followed, walking in silence, our hearts filled with love and devotion. The light of heaven grew ever closer, and I knew that I was about to witness the full glory of the divine. Canto 33. Beatrice stood beside me, her face glowing with divine light, and I felt the love of God flowing through her presence. We were now at the gates of paradise, and the light of heaven shone brightly before us. The procession of saints and angels moved forward, their voices lifted in hymns of praise, and I followed them, filled with a sense of awe and anticipation. As we walked, Beatrice spoke to me, her voice filled with wisdom and love. She said, "Dante, the journey you have taken has led you to this place, where the mysteries of God are revealed in their fullness. You have been purified, and now you stand ready to see the voice and face of God." I listened to her words and felt a deep sense of peace, for I knew that I had finally reached the goal of my journey. We came to a place where the river of life flowed, its waters clear and bright, and I saw that this was the river that nourished the souls of the blessed. Beatrice led me to the edge of the river, and we knelt together looking into it and its pure waters. She said, "This is the river of grace, which flows from the heart of God. All who drink from it are filled with the love of heaven and are made whole." I gazed into the river and saw reflections of the divine light shimmering on the surface of the water. It was as if the very essence of God was flowing through the river, bringing life and love to all creation. Beatrice then said, "Now, Dante, it is time for you to drink from the waters of life, so that you may fully enter into the joy of heaven." I knelt by the river and cupped my hands to drink. As the cool water touched my lips, I felt a wave of love and grace flow through me, and all the pain and sorrow of my past melted away. I was filled with such a sense of joy that words cannot describe, for I knew that I had been made whole by the love of God. As I rose from the river, Beatrice smiled at me, her eyes shining with divine wisdom. She said, "You are now ready, for the journey of purification is complete. The love of God will guide you, and you will see the glory of heaven in all its fullness." The angels and saints continued to sing, their voices filling the air with joy, and I knew that I was standing at the very threshold of paradise. Beatrice led me forward, and as we walked, the light of heaven grew brighter, filling the entire sky with its radiance. We reached the gates of paradise, and they opened before us, revealing the eternal joy and light of God in all its glory. At that moment, I was filled with a love so powerful that it seemed to lift me from the earth, carrying me toward the light of heaven. The journey was complete, and I stood in the presence of God, bathed in the light of his love.